So as we're pinging people in, just a couple of things that I'd like to mention. Be sure you follow me, all our moderators and our panelists here today. You'll want to check out, follow others in the room, and be sure to follow those new Clubhouse members, the ones with the little party hats next to their name, to help support them. We encourage everyone to raise their digital hand. We do our very best to get to everyone, but it's certainly a participatory, friendly room. And additionally, to support those using closed caption, we request that you please state your name when you begin speaking, and then again, state your name at the end. For example, my name is Julie, and I'm done speaking. You'll want to look into my bio if you have any direct questions, comments, feedback, suggestions. My email is there. Please contact me directly. I love hearing from you guys. Additionally, follow us on social media. Links are in my bio as well as our Consuli Conversations bio. And for those that don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our individual data is worth $20K per year. So we help people choose who gets access to and how their personal health information is used, and if and when desired, get them paid for their data and make medicine better. So we do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent. Our members receive smart match and individualized offers from us for opportunity, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There is no cost to join our movement. You can learn more at consuli.net. It's CONSULI.net. That information also is in my bio and our Consuli Conversations bio. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to our room moderator, Elizabeth Dreicer, who is a philanthropist, activist, as well as co-founder and CEO of Consuli. Elizabeth will be introducing our distinguished panelists and guests. Elizabeth, now over to you. This is Julie, I'm speaking.
Thanks so much, Julie, and thanks, Julie, Arca, and Julia for making this room happen and this event possible. And we're delighted to welcome and host and facilitate this discussion. Also, just a point, there has been an ongoing body of dialogue, and thanks to Julia and others, that information, the information from our prior Clubhouse discussions can be found on our Miro board. So if you click on my bio, you should be able to link to that. Okay, so I'd like to start. First, I know that we'll get let me just see here if we got Gil yet. Nope, not quite yet. So we'll skip Gil's intro and we'll introduce him when he joins from Senator Gillibrand's office. But we'll begin with introducing Mark Howard. Mark is a Ph.D. candidate in politics at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where his research focuses on visions of justice within the venture capital industry and the effects that such visions have upon the process of innovation. Mark specializes in political theory and political economy. Prior to becoming a researcher, Mark spent almost 2 decades working as a business technology consultant within the financial industry, including health insurance. And during this time, he led several large programs of work relating to corporate data transformation and big data. He is currently employed as a faculty member at Crown College at UCSC, will be teaching a course this coming fall on the ethical and political implications of emerging technologies. Please join me in welcoming Mark to the stage. Mark, the mic is yours. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking for now.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I'm really pleased to be here today. I was invited by Linda, who's actually a colleague at Crown. She looped me into the conversation because of some of my interest around venture capital and this sort of new world that is being inaugurated at a speed that we are struggling to keep abreast of. And these changes, data being one of the major ones that our social organization is still trying to catch up with. The sort of underlying premise of what I'm trying to do or trying to research and investigate is how we can get in front of this change more broadly, how we can get right to the source of sort of the financial processes that are going on, and start from a good foundation, start from some ethical principles that will grow into something much, much bigger that is built on this sound foundation, that is built according to not this kind of blind movement into the future, but something that is trying to not necessarily preordain a vision of justice for the future, but at least carefully as we step into these new spaces. So I'm really pleased to be here today and join the conversation.
Thanks so much, Mark. Really glad to have you. Next up, I'd like to introduce Professor Sylvie Delacroix. Sylvie focuses on the intersection between law and ethics, with a particular interest in data and machine ethics. Her current research focuses on the design of computer systems meant for morally loaded contexts. She's also considering the potential inherent in bottom-up data trust as a mechanism to address the power imbalances between data subjects and data controllers. You can see more about her work on this front at datatrust.uk for an overview. Professor Delacroix has served on the Public Policy Commission on the use of algorithms in the justice system, Law Society of England and Wales, and the Data Trust Policy Group under the auspices of the UK AI Council. She's also a fellow of the Alan Turing Institute and a Mozilla fellow. Sylvie, really glad to have you with us again. I'm turning the mic to you for your opening remarks. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking for now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm very happy to be here today, and I'm curious to hear also from all the other perspectives around. What I should say briefly is, my perspective, I do work on data trust. I have been working on this for some years now. Now, the idea of data trust is really to say, okay, it's great that we have top-down regulation, that in Europe at least it gives us rights, data rights over data. But is that the whole answer to the problems that are emerging today when it comes to the dawning realization that we are all leaking data on a daily basis and it makes us vulnerable? That's one problem. And the other problem is that we're missing opportunities to unlock the potential inherent in many AI tools today that we can't use to their full potential because we can't share data intelligently. So these are the two problems which data trust try to address, basically. Vulnerability. Yeah, we are vulnerable when we go online. And even when, like in Europe, we have rights granted by the instrument of regulation, very often they're difficult to exercise those rights and they don't necessarily address power imbalances. So that's the one problem. And the other problem is really that we can do better when it comes to data sharing. And how can we do this intelligently and responsibly? And data trusts are really a way of saying, okay, we can act, we can empower groups to get together, pool the rights they have over the data, and basically task an intermediary, a professional intermediary, in this case, the data trustee, to exercise those rights on our behalf. I should stop here, but I should say thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. Really appreciate you being with us again. Okay, so next up, I'd like to introduce Chris Laudanski. Chris is an assistant professor in the Department of Anesthesiology and Critical Care at the University of Pennsylvania and senior fellow at the Leonard Davis Institute for Healthcare Economics. His research interests focus on regulating DNA expression in survivors after critical care illnesses, healthcare operations, medical decision-making processes, and healthcare innovation, particularly AI and nanotechnology. He is a principal investigator on the NIH-funded grant investigating abnormalities in gene regulation after critical care insult. Dr. Laudanski is the founder of a startup, QBIM Diagnostic, and I'm so sorry if I got that wrong. It's spelled QBIMM Diagnostic, a company oriented at diagnosing immune disorders using nanotechnology. He's also a president of the Society for Healthcare Innovation. And since his research showed that optimal decision-making processes that might expose patients to unnecessary risks and have negative economic consequences for hospital systems. He suggested, developed, and implemented an artificial algorithm in critical care settings, integrated AI with wearable sensors and predictive diagnostics. The things he's committed to enter with several of his mentees obtaining positions in academia at Stanford, Yale, private companies such as Merck, or awarded prestigious scholarships at NSF, National Science Foundation. Chris, we're delighted to have you. I'm turning the mic to you for your opening remarks. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking for now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It was way too kind introduction, and obviously I have to work on the name of the company. My story is sort of interesting in the terms that as I became more and more involved in medicine and as I mature as attending, I very quickly realized how little we know about what we do, especially in the terms of the ethical principles. And what I'm sort of afraid is what happened in 10 or 20 years when people may lose the faith in what we do with their data. And both as an individual and both as a physician, I quite often question how we collect the data, what do we do with the data, and how the data can be regained in the terms of the control by the patients. Also, by the sphere where I do my research, epigenetic and genetics, I can see a huge potential for the abuse. And using, putting another layer of the AI on this is another sort of avenue how we can misuse the technology. And what I'm afraid of, at some point, we just lost the public trust in what we do. And that sort of pushed me in the Center for Healthcare Innovation to think much more about a lot of innovation that are being on the horizon, being emerging right now. How do we actually implement them the way that we can continue to have some ethical principle discussion in order to actually preserve the trust in those innovations in the future? So that is why I got sort of interested. I would like very much thank you, Elizabeth, for invitation. Again, I would work on the name of the company. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, how do we pronounce it, just so we do know at this point?
It's a cubing diagnostic.
Okay, cubing. Okay, thank you so much. That way I'll know for the future. All right, so thank you, Chris. This is Elizabeth. I'd like to next introduce Linda MacDonald-Glenn. Linda is the founding director of the Center for Applied Values and Ethics in Advanced Technologies. Acronym is CAVEAT, C-A-V-E-A-T, at Crown College at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She is a recovering attorney, but also an ethicist, futurist, educator, and advisor with over 30 years of experience in a variety of sectors, including exponential technology, healthcare, government, education, business ethics, and futures forecasting. It is our distinct pleasure to have Linda with us. Linda, I'm turning the mic over to you. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking for now.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that very kind introduction. It's always strange to hear that somebody else talk about what I've done. But in this room today, I'm just so pleased to see so many of my colleagues and looking forward to our continued conversation about, so many of the different things. Sylvia, really thrilled to see you join us and hear more about the trust. And Mark, I'm really interested in, I'm so glad you could join us today, hearing about the power, imbalances. And Chris has such a fantastic perspective from the healthcare innovation. I think we're just, this team, we're going to be able to come up with some really, really great action. And it's just my pleasure to be here. I hope I can add something meaningful to the conversation. This is Linda, and I'm done speaking.
Thank you so much, Linda. I really appreciate you being here, and we really appreciate all the great thought partnership that you've brought to the discussion, and also the other colleagues that you've brought to the discussion. So thanks for that. Next up, I know we're going to maybe see David join shortly, but we're going to go on to Christine von Raestel. And Christine is the founder, CEO of People with Empathy. Christine is a leader in bringing a critically needed patient perspective to cutting-edge medical innovations. She's committed to providing patients with chronic and rare diseases with the support they need. Christine works with patient advocacy organizations, industry representatives, and individual patients and their loved ones. Christine, living herself with many rare and chronic diseases, she believes that the only way to ensure health equity is to leverage one's own data. As a patient involved in Stanford's human-wide program, she speaks on the benefits and advantages of precision medicine with a special interest in pharmacogenomics. Christine's drive to make lives better for patients has been globally recognized. In 2019, she spoke at the Startup Health Festival. In 2018, Christine served on the team of patient advisors for Patients Like Me. She's been recognized for her work in advocacy, including several awards, Silicon Valley Business Journal's 100 Women of Influence in 2019, 2020 Community Hero by Assemblyman Kansan Chu, and most recently, Future 50 Community Leader with HIMSS. For those that are in the healthcare sector, you'll know him as well. In addition, Christine has served as a virtual advisor team member for the All of Us research program that's being conducted by NIH, a technical expert panelist for CMS, and a patient advisor consultant for multiple pharmaceutical campaigns and startup ventures. You can hear Christine's perspective Monday through Friday in the Clubhouse Room Health.Reconsidered, where she discusses med tech, digital rights, clinical trials, patient experience, and precision medicine. Okay, Christine, I'm turning the mic to you. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking for now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is Christine, and you make me sound impressive, but really, I am a patient. I have grown up. I was born and raised in Silicon Valley, and I think that with my experience, I have a little bit of a different take on things than the general population. I see that patients really need to be aware of the value of their data, and not just their individual data, but the collective data and what it provides to our industry. And for me, I really believe that it's only through the collective intelligence and the collaborative leadership that we're going to find solutions for us all. So always happy to be a part of the discussions. And that's it. I'm Christine. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you for being here. Okay, next up, I'd like to introduce Javier Cruz. Javier is the founder of Ideas for Change and the creator of Cruz.
Sorry, sir. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm Javi Cruz from Barcelona, Spain, and I want to share the experience of building Salus Coop. Salus Coop is a non-for-profit citizen cooperative of data for health research. We had the idea, a group of citizens in Barcelona 5 years ago. We're launching on October with research projects by hospitals, By the way, we co-designed with citizens license. We asked 8,000 citizens under which conditions would they share their data for health research, genetical, clinical, socioeconomical, lifestyle data. And they came up with 5 conditions to that, which we packed into a license, which is the Salus Common Good Data License. And that's non-for-profit research, open research. Can be, you can stop sharing your data at any time. And health research. And that's what I wanted to share. And again, as the previous speaker said, I believe it's not only about my data, it's about the collective governance of data. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being with us. And next up, I'm going to go back and introduce Gil, who I see has joined us. Hi, Gil. Good morning. A little bit about Gil. Gil is the senior advisor to Senator Gillibrand on matters of tech, health, homeland security, and arts policy. He has worked with the senator for over 5 years and previously had experience with Georgetown University's Global Social Enterprise Initiative at the MacDonald School of Business and with AARP. Gil has handled high-profile legislation such as the Data Protection Act, which would create a data protection agency. Gil is passionate about the potential for technology to be a force for good, and he believes that the battle for civil rights in the digital age will center around the right to privacy and our collective understanding around data dignity. Gil, we're delighted to have you. I'm turning the mic to you for your opening remarks. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking for now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that, Elizabeth. Great to be with you all again in this next segment of our data dignity conversations, which get me excited every time. And I take something new away every time. And just to add a little bit to what Elizabeth opened with, I handle as her senior advisor for tech portfolio, health and homeland security, in particular the Data Protection Act, a bill to establish the Data Protection Agency to enforce and meaningfully interpret the data privacy laws and make sure that whatever rights that we have or will have get enforced properly, because it's really, really awesome to have rights, and it's even better when they're enforced. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation. This is Gil. I'm done speaking.
Thanks so much, Gil. Okay, this is Elizabeth, and next up we have Alice Rathjen. Alice is one of the early pioneers of computational biology and spatial analysis of genomes. She's been a serial entrepreneur in genomics for nearly 2 decades, having launched Dominga, the first direct-to-consumer genetic testing service in 2000, and DNA Guide, the first genome browser for mobile platforms in 2009. Her SlideShare's presentation on precision medicine have exceeded 50,000 views. She's previously won the Kaufman Award for Women in Science and Engineering, and you can follow her at DNA Times. Alice brings to DNA Compass her passion for patient-centric data and building federated genomics infrastructure for delivering consented genomes at scale. Alice, we're delighted to have you again. I'm turning the mic to you for your opening remarks. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking for now.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. So this is Alice. I'm very excited about this group on data dignity. And, I think of this in terms of the evolution of our digital humanity, that, some aspect of our life becomes digitized, a platform emerges and becomes, incredibly effective. And right now we don't have a data file format or flat platform that represents a digital human being. So there's no anchor for us to have data dignity. And the question is how do we move from this de-identified data to a solution that solves government regulation on a global scale and allows individuals to benefit from their data. So Hobby, very excited to hear about your project. And this is Alice, I'm done speaking.
Thank you so much, Alice. Really glad to have you again. Next up is David Lang. David is an advisor to Consuli. He's also a managing partner of DAL Consulting Group. He advises and provides strategic guidance, pivotal introductions, and access to capital for mission-inspired companies. He also provides environmental, social, and corporate governance counsel. Lang was the founding executive of the Balboa Park Cultural Partnership, a collaborative body for 26 cultural institutions in San Diego's historic Balboa Park. Prior to joining the partnership, he was Director of Government Affairs and Assistant to the Chairman of the Board of the parent company of the NFL's Tennessee Titans. Lang serves on a number of boards, including the Corporate Directors Forum Board of Directors and Bastyr University Board of Trustees, to name a few. It is my pleasure to turn the mic to David Lang for his opening remarks. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking for now.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and I'm delighted to be in this group and looking forward to listening and learning and contributing as I can. This is David, and I'm done speaking.
Thanks so much, David. Really glad to have you. Okay, so next up, we're all the way from India. We're delighted to have Sojanya Sridharan, and Sojanya is a research analyst at the Apti Institute, a Bangalore-based think tank that explores lived experiences at the intersection of technology and society. Her work at Apti's The Data Economy Lab explores approaches to equitable data governance, such as data stewardship and collective bargaining for data rights, with a particular emphasis on the health sector. Previous engagements include her work on gender and tech policy at IT for Change, and a study on labor unions in India's IT and ITES industries as part of her master's thesis at the Jai University. I'm so sorry if I made mistakes there, so you can correct me. I'm turning the mic over to Sojanya for opening remarks. This is Elizabeth, and I'm done speaking for now.
Thanks, Elizabeth and the Consuli team for having me over. It's been great listening to what the others have to say. In so many ways, what they have said has set the stage for the research we're doing at Apti. To put it simply, very obvious that patients and advocacy groups are often engaged in exploitative relationships with governments, with providers, and so on. They have little visibility on how their data is used when you provide it at the point of care. And this is where our research comes in. Our research on health data stewardship presents a way of rethinking data governance, such that individuals and communities are at the heart of the decision-making processes. They set the purposes, they define the limits for which their data can be used, and also it provides a real way in which patients can derive value from their health data. And as Professor Delacroix pointed out, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to data governance, and the answer really lies in looking at the different sectors, the different contexts, and also the different stakeholders that each individual steward has to serve to be able to deliver on equitable data governance. I'm excited to hear what the others have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really glad to have you. This is Elizabeth, and as we kick off our panel discussion, I want to begin with a dialogue point that sort of continues from our last conversation. And this is particularly around this idea of, the framework for rights as it relates to data. And, and we've had lots of discussion about what the label ought to be, but the concept is, this idea of personal data property rights, distinct from privacy. And I want to just hear from the panel, thoughts, so again, setting aside whether or not the right term of art is property, but the idea that there is an extension of one's persona that includes our data envelope. That's part of the the discussion that I think continues, and we hear is an important bright line that needs to be disambiguated. So I'd love to kick off the conversation, and I would love to hear from everyone. Whoever wants to take their mic off mute and jump in. Sylvie, the mic is yours. This is Elizabeth. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think this is a great way to start a conversation in that, well, what I'm struck by is that there's this appeal to thinking about data in terms of property that is particularly strong in the US. It's, I think, partly cultural, and it has to do with an intuition that in order to regain control, we need to have some sense of ownership of our data. And I think it's an intuition that used to work when it was about houses and castles, etc. But data is not like houses and castles, it's much more like a river. And so I've been trying to explain, or to at least argue, that we can and we should regain much greater agency over our data, but that we're not going to achieve that through the vocabulary of property or ownership. So how do we achieve that? And that's where I think it's useful to start from what's at stake here. Why are people up in arms about their personal data, including health data? And I think it has to do in part about the nature of the vulnerability at stake. So it's something to do with the way we remain free to project who we want to be, who we want to become. That is not determined by the profile that has been generated based on our past data. Yes, so there's an extent to which people intuitively decisions about very instrumental decisions like mortgages, or much more subtle decisions like which friends are recommended to us and things like that. All these decisions will be guided, will be informed by the profile that has been generated on the basis of this personal data. And I think so that intuitively gets people worried. And it's right that they're worried, but I think what we need to then think about is we need to move from the individualist model. It's interesting when you look at the legal frameworks for data. For a long time, at least in the West, with thinking around collective rights. And actually, I think in India, there's a lot to be said for, I think you are ahead in India. When I was talking to your colleagues, sorry, I've not caught your name, but anyway, I want to emphasize the extent to which perhaps once we think about the kind of vulnerability at stake and the extent to which what
consent has come up, and I think we've been talking a little bit about that. And the thing that really came to mind was this idea that comes from a philosopher called John Locke about the social contract, and about the idea that people living in society give up certain rights in exchange for certain protections. One of the themes that he came up with was this notion of tacit consent, the fact that just by living in a society, you're already kind of exploiting the goods that society gives to you, and therefore it's this fair exchange. And there are many problems with that argument, but I do see a kind of analogy when we're talking about the way people interact with corporate services, social media, and so on. Is in they go online, they use these goods, and there's this avenue for people to argue that there's a tacit consent for your data to be there, to be used, whatever. And, it's no coincidence that companies like Facebook see themselves as operating like governments, and Zuckerberg is on record as saying this kind of thing. But the notion of tacit consent really, the idea is that by giving this consent, you're supposed to get rights in exchange for giving up certain freedoms. But the thing that really gets me is, the idea of people actually knowing what they're giving up. So the idea of tacit consent is we don't necessarily know we've given the consent until it's sort of too late. We're already involved in this system. And I'm really interested to know what some of the people in this panel think about the idea of digital literacy. It's all great thinking we should have access to their data. But what about those people that don't even know that their data is out there? They don't even know that they're giving data away. I live with my mother-in-law who's in her 80s, and she goes on Facebook and services like this, and she thinks she's still privately sharing things. she has no idea when she shares a photo or somebody. She thinks it's been sent to her personally. And all of this is, sort of data that's being built, a profile that's being built about her. And then, not to get too into my mother-in-law, but, there are certain naiveties there about the things she says, the sort of ways she interacts online that then give away more information than is healthy. So I'm just wondering, data online is like a signaling process, right? And I'm just wondering what people think about that.
Can I step in there for a second, Mark? This is Christine. And I want to say I'm working with a group of patients that run an organization called the Light Collective. And their focus is solely on educating people around, that information. They were Facebook, they were on Facebook. The group had data that was released, and we're on a mission to really teach patients that you shouldn't be giving out a lot of this data online, because not only companies or industry, but people prey on others and their altruistic views. And so I really think, like you said, that education is needed with the general population and not just patient populations on where the data is, what it's being used for, and how it's being used. It's just coming out with Facebook, and people are freaked out about that when they don't realize they're also giving out a lot more information than they think. And so I think that education and awareness is key. And Christine, my perspective.
Thanks, Christine. I want to ask if there are other panelists that want to speak. By the way, consent is one of the topic areas, sort of this issue of like mechanisms for managing rights and defining rights. Transparency is another sort of thrust and pillar, and then consent is certainly, I think, a very important dimension here. I'm wondering if Gil, or who came off mute? Go ahead. Sujana? Sujana?
Yeah. Saujanya.
Saujanya, thank you.
No worries. So just wanted to draw attention to the possibility that conversations around digital literacy put the onus of making data decisions on data subjects or data principals themselves, when it's actually, this line of argument sometimes fails to account for how we can hold tech corporations, or whether it's providers or governments, accountable. An excellent example that came up over the course of my research is the UK government's recent proposal to use the general practitioners' data, 55 million patient records, for planning and research. And this has been suspended since. But the point is that 55 million patient records were going to be shared with corporations without explaining for what purposes. And even after repeated petitions to the government, the UK government said this is for research purposes. And in so many ways, the conversation boils down to how data subjects can hold the governments and the corporations accountable to be made available the purposes for which their data are shared. And that is where the roles of regulator comes in, where you need data protection legislations, you need frameworks for data sharing that have clearly outlined why your data can be used and how. Excellent example is Finland and its Act on Secondary Use of Health Data. It makes available anonymized, aggregated health and social well-being data for use in research, in innovation, in social planning and development. So this is some of the ways that, taking the onus of data subjects, but putting it on providers to ensure they comply and use data in ways that are rights preserving and also consented to by individuals.
Can I ask a question here? Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you. Thank you for holding this room. My name is Sophie. I'm a clinical evaluation scientist for a medical device company called Boston Scientific. And I've also been a patient. So in my current role, I am evaluating our medical devices for safety and performance and submitting those evaluations and analytics to notified bodies in Europe. So I'm very aware of EU's regulations, EU Commission and GDPR. And I'm concerned on two fronts. One is, as a patient, as a consumer myself, how do I make sure that the data I want to be out there is out there and being used wisely? And two, as a researcher, how do I make sure that we have the relevant data? For example, we use real world data now, more recently to support safety and efficacy for our medical devices as well as drugs in this country as well as abroad. So we talked about, I think, was it Javi or Saujanya or maybe Alice who talked about a digital imprint or digital identity. And we've already had lots of identity theft, identity fraud when it comes to, financial imprint. So how do we prevent that? How do you see, I think my primary question is, how do you see an ideal digital identity when it comes to health data? What does that look like? In an ideal world, if everyone cooperated, we all agreed on what was needed, infrastructure. What does that digital identity look like? This is Sophie, I'm complete.
Thank you, Sophie, good question. I want to actually direct that, if I may. Alice, did you want to take that?
Yeah, that's exactly on my sweet spot. I couldn't help it.
Yes, I think it's perfect.
Okay, so there's a need for a technical infrastructure, and as Javi pointed out, it needs to be federated. We can't have a Facebook for human digital data. It has to have rights associated with local data manufacturing, whether that's a community, an individual, a country. It has to stay there. So what could work is that pharma, people with big budgets, are going to realize if they want to work with real data, they need to solve this on a global basis and give the power to governments. And the question is how do you deploy this cost effectively? And one way of doing it is using the genome as the data file format for a digital human being, and having the labs, when they create a digital human being, convert it to a biological domain. So you have like biological domain registrars, and now you have a human being that exists on the web with a solid anchor to provide the foundation for all these dynamics to sort out globally. And there's existing infrastructure that can be reused. The genome can be consented to the base pair, reusing the coordinate system that's used to map the Earth. Genomic data is just location data. All your governments, universities, everybody has mapping software already deployed, up and running. The labs can immediately use that to consent the genome and create this digital human being that provides the foundation for working with real data, consented with digital dignity associated with it. So, Allison, I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Allison. I mean, it's a very interesting vision for, sort of how one could really anchor. Definitely lots to that, certainly to unpack. I want to also see if Linda and or Julia maybe want to speak to, how one might think about not just the actual biological anchor, but also like all the concentric rings of information, not just there's sort of the factual, and then there's the behavioral pieces. I know that there's been some dialogue about that as well, just in the context of answering Sophie's question around what is an ideal framework. Linda, do you want to speak to that, at least from your perspective? And Julia, would you like to also? Okay, Linda, I'm waiting for you to come off mute. Julia, I'll turn it to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, we can kind of hear you. I don't know if it's possible to get a little closer to the mic.
Okay, I think this is the best I can do right now. Is it audible?
It's kind of not wonderful. Are you able to get any closer or just even speak up?
Okay.
We can come back to you if you just need a minute, and we'll continue.
Is this better?
Yes, much. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. I don't really have an exact framework, but I think data identity is different. Like, I think healthcare data with the data genome or the DNA is very specific to the healthcare field. And when you look at how data is used just in the broader scope, I think it needs to be a sector conversation, and each sector and use of data and how they see an individual depends on what they're measuring, because data is all about measuring something, and I think it's a relational relationship between whatever they're measuring and then how it's meaningful to each individual. And probably my idea is, like, I think how we view the digital person is different in each scenario where what we're measuring changes. But that's just what I've been thinking about. So this is Julia, and I'm finished speaking. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Julia. I want to just posit sort of a controversial question, and now maybe as good a time as any in the dialogue. And that is, while we discuss personal data and, sort of like what the edges of what we should be able to control either individually or collectively, do we think that the commercial parties consider data assets? So that's a question.
Can I tune in on that, Elizabeth?
Sure.
So really just being a patient in this space, right? And everybody is after my data, regardless of what it is, right? That we have hard medical data that the hospitals and researchers can use, but we also collect data from my wearables and other things that could help build products. And I think that as far as the pharmaceutical industry, they have guidelines and regulations already in place on how those relationships need to be handled. But as far as the commercial side, there is no restrictions on that. And you have people who, have great ideas who reach out to patient communities and don't value their data and don't even have discussions with these patients around the data that they're collecting. And at the same time, having them really purge their whole community to, an idea that they believe in. So, it's interesting because I think data has a value. It has a specific value to industry, and most people don't want the individual to know the value of that data. So it's an interesting mix. I tell patients all the time when they work with companies, when companies reach out to them, ask about that data. What is happening with it? Who are they giving it to? Are they selling it to a third party? Because that happens quite a bit as well. And, I don't know the answer. I wish that we had like a set thing, but I think pharma has certain regulations that industry doesn't follow, and that's a huge issue. And I'm Christine, my perspective.
Thanks, Christine. Appreciate that. So, go ahead, Mark.
So I just wanted to, so this is Mark speaking. I just wanted to jump in there as well about this question of data as an asset, because my research into the venture capital industry has been largely led towards this idea of, looking at growth before profits, which is today immensely driven by data accumulation. And data accumulation has come to replace or stand in for capital accumulation. So the value of it is actually taking place of real cash value as far as assets are concerned. And then that's cumulative. There is this real sentiment amongst companies that they should collect for the sake of collecting because it might become useful in future. It might give them leverage in future. So that's one aspect of my research. But I also, just sort of echoing Christine a bit here as well, want to say, my experience working in the health insurance industry, I worked at Blue Shield of California on 3 separate occasions. And every time I went back there, it was more and more of a data company. And I mean, you know, to the point where the last time I went there, data wasn't just a thing that they were using. They were almost a data company. That was exactly what they were doing. They were pooling data, collecting data, and everything they were orienting their IT organization around was ways to control and build that data to get leverage. And it was striking to me even then, before I began thinking about these things, about the transformation of what they've realized. So when we talk about data as an asset, it's becoming core, not just an ancillary to a lot of what corporations are doing.
I think that's a really important perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And part of why I was, teasing that out too, is that while, advocates for patients may be thinking about how we can collectively create value, I think there's definitely the private sector has already, let's just say, annexed, one might say, hijacked, but there's lots of different adjectives one might use. So, Jonna, I think you came off mute. I'm happy to give you the mic.
Yes, thank you. I just want to, highlight that sometimes it's hard when we speak of assigning value to data and treating it as an asset. It's so many times difficult to understand what is the value that data possesses, mostly because data is inherently social as well as dynamic. When I say social, it's because data about me is also useful to reveal information about the behaviors of others, while it's also dynamic because data that is collected today can be used 20 years down the line and has possibly infinite uses. And in this situation, particularly when you say consider its applications in AI and ML, questions of ownership are complicated. You can't say an individual is an owner of data when your data is going to be used to reveal information about others. And the second thing, I'm being compensated for the value it might be used for today. But how can I ensure that, 20 years down the line when it's going to be used, my health data to build AI/ML bot for diagnoses, I get compensated for the same value, whether it's in money terms or not. The last point really is there is also the added complication of co-generated data. Say, for example, when like autonomous vehicles, right? There is an enormous amount of data generated by the vehicle itself, but also by me as a driver in interaction with the vehicle. So who owns this data? Who can lay claim to this data? Does the driving company lay claim to the data? Do I, as a driver, can lay claim to that data? So when we talk about assets, we need to also consider how do you assign ownership to an asset, right? Which is why maybe thinking of it in terms of rights and being able to control how your data is used is maybe an alternative framework.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I want to turn the floor to Gil. Did we lose Gil? Oh no. I wanted to hear from our congressional perspectives. Hopefully we get him back. Looks like he just fell off. So so just maybe thinking, I know we're going to take audience questions too. And just a reminder for those in the audience, if you want to raise your digital hand, please feel free to do so. We'll get you to the stage. I know, Julie, I'm going to turn it to you right now to reset the room briefly, and then we'll continue. Julie,
I couldn't get my mute to come off. Hi, everyone. Julie here. This is Julie Szmyd, project manager at Consuli and host for our club Consuli Conversations in this fabulous room, Data Dignity. Thank you all for joining us for this important conversation. I just want to take a moment to reset our room, share a little bit about Consuli's mission. We are a public benefit company working to create a marketplace where we deal individuals like you and me into the data economy. We're creating a movement, and there's no cost to join, so we hope you will check us out and sign up so we can do all the things we're talking about in this room. You can find our website, links to our social, and my direct email if you'd like to contact me with any questions, feedback, comments. If you'd like to join our panel again, all that's in my bio. And our upcoming rooms are in the bio of our Consuli Clubhouse. Be sure to tap the little greenhouse at the top, follow us. And be sure to follow all our moderator, Elizabeth, and all our panelists here today as well. Additionally, please take this moment to ping others that you think may be interested in this conversation into the room. Also, for anyone in the audience, if you find yourself inspired to join the conversation, we encourage you to raise your digital hand and participate. Elizabeth, I will pass the mic back to you. This is Julie, and I'm done speaking.
Thanks so much. And then just let us know when we're ready for folks to join. All right, so just getting back to the conversation, I think we've talked about the different frameworks for rights, however we want to think about that. I don't know if we got Linda back. I was hoping we might hear from Linda as well. If so, take yourself off mute. Otherwise, all right, so then maybe I'll throw out a couple of other things, which are, transparency. What type of transparency frameworks? Where is my data? Who's using it? Love to hear from the panelists about ideas and frameworks for transparency.
I would love to hear from Alice on this one, because I think Alice has an amazing idea on using the geo-positioning. And Alice, I'd love to hear that.
Well, let me talk about, so something that folks haven't quite considered is that there's likely to be treaties between governments that have functioning EHR systems with wonderful phenotype data, and that they're positioned to be much more successful at getting drugs, to market and the like, because they have better foundational data and more of a social contract for how to work with health data. So let's imagine that that France and another country, or Singapore, they create a legal definition of a digital human being so that they can claim their citizens and the investment that they've made in that infrastructure and that data. They allow other entities to have access to that data, but they're subject to audits to prove that the data is consented. So you have a scenario where data was stolen, like genomes were stolen from Singapore. Those genomes show up on a pharma company's data set because it's so easy to do an audit based on a genetic data set. It's incredibly easy to re-identify. And then the data gets pulled back. So all this data that's effectively been stolen as de-identified data becomes a huge liability in the future. And I just want to throw that I do think that there's going to be government treaties based on audits, so that to sort out this issue of consent and how the data is monetized and how it's structured to benefit their populations. So I'm Alice, I'm done speaking.
Thank you so much, Alice. Very interesting. And I can certainly see that future scenario. I'm wondering whether the information, the very unique genetic information is, what the scale of expression in the current electronic health records, just for those that were listening that maybe don't know the vernacular. Wondering what you think the ratio of that sort of clearly identified genetic information is, because I'm not sure to what degree some of these systems currently hold that data effectively, just in the context of how many of us have that genomic data. Curious about that, Alice.
So before Alice steps in, can I say, Elizabeth, that, I do work with the All of Us research program, and I think it is going to come to a point where we are all genetically sequenced. We do have patients right now who are searching for answers and giving away their genetic data to try to find answers to what they're dealing with. So I think, with the mission of All of Us and really getting data from 1 million people in the United States, we are all going to be genetically sequenced at some point. And for me, it's really taking that collective data and making it effective for our populations in a way that we don't get left behind at the same time. And Alice, I'll go back to you because I stepped in. So go ahead.
Well, there's a tragedy in that there's so much government subsidy of the data creation, and the academic institutions that are working on getting published papers, their focus is, to win the Nobel Prize, and not necessarily to, and secondarily to that is to save human lives in a pandemic. They're not incentivized to take responsibility for the data and make things like what variant of a mutation have I been exposed to readily accessible. And the excuse is that it's too expensive, too labor intensive. But the truth is that these are platforms built by men that just don't get consent. They just have gone away without being bothered with it for a long time, and they want to continue operating as if genomic data can be de-identified. That is just about at its end. And I look forward to the demise of that model.
Very interesting, and I appreciate that perspective, as well. And also, we know just from our own research that lots of data, even at academic institutions, are being sold in the many hundreds of millions of dollars out the back end. Once the research needs are met by the institution. So. This is part of the inquiry around commercialization of what's already happened. I mean, in many ways, the train has left the station. Data has been wildly commercialized, and we live in a world where it's super important. And now the question becomes, kind of ex post facto reassigning a framework for rights, individual rights as it relates to data. So maybe that's a way that we can all agree that there's a need for rights, whether it's individual or collective. The of the use of that data, and then this idea of a legitimate framework for consent, because I think we can all agree that the current consent structure is, more or less a joke. It's not bona fide consent if I have to walk into an emergency room and I need care. And in order to get care, there's this wonderful thing in the United States that says, hey, you have, Health Information Privacy Act, which is called like a HIPAA disclosure for those that aren't in the United States. And then adjacent to that, like literally there's usually one sentence right in that same paragraph that says, and you give over the data to research. And the research isn't just singular to that particular hospital. That is sort of a fait accompli statement. So, it's literally been one of the biggest data heists in many ways attached to privacy rights, which is an interesting unintended consequence, at least as we see it, in the United States for sure, and perhaps elsewhere. I'd love to hear others' thoughts on that. And I want to give, I know Chris, Javi, Mark, I want to make sure we hear from you as well. And then if there's any other audience member that wants to get in on this conversation, we welcome you to raise your digital hand and do so. Oh, great. And I see, well, Justin, we'll get to you too in a moment. First, Mark, Chris, Javi, anything you want to say on this topic? Okay. These topics, Javi, yes, the floor is yours. Please. Javi, can you get a little closer to your microphone?
Sure. I'd like to point to things. Thank you. One is that health data is going to be relevant not only of sick people, but of healthy people, because real health depends a lot on lifestyle, whether you exercise and you have friends and so on. Second, we've seen the power of sharing data by getting the COVID vaccine under 1 year research, by sharing data among scientific academy and researchers. But we've seen at the same time that the structure of the property of that data hasn't had vaccines for everyone around the world. I would like to think that we find a way to share data in which the next pandemic we could solve in less than a year, and at the same time have the structures to provide, extend this knowledge to everyone, not only to rich countries, for example. Thank you, Dan Tolkien.
Thank you. We definitely agree on the equity front. So, Mark, Chris, Mark, the mic is yours.
This is Mark. I would like to just, so I'm really fascinated by this idea of the sort of digital genome, and I have concerns, which are probably due to my own ignorance around the issue. But immediately, sort of my ears prick up as someone working in political science about the in principle issue of government still potentially selling data. And I think Christine made this point earlier. It's come up a couple of times. As well as the practical issue of popular resistance, which is really becoming a theme, not just in US politics, but around the world, around sort of government overreach. But in addition to that, there's the problem as well. So years ago, I remember going to a conference, we were talking about cloud data and the problem of sovereign ownership over data centers in perhaps a country where there might be a coup, and the dangers that sort of raises. And there's another principle here, which is, if the government has all that data, they have this digital footprint, elections happen, things change. And it's not necessarily going to be a nefarious sort of process where people do malicious things with the data, but it does change the way that data might be used, because certain political orders might come about that are far more interested in public-private collaborations, which will then see data going into the private corporate sphere anyway. There are already examples of, like, Palantir, for example, works a lot with the government, and some of what they do is in principle driven by surreptitious need, right? So they would claim tracking down terrorists and this sort of thing. And of course, it raises all these problems around data of, once you're flagged in a certain way, that data carries around with you. And that this idea of the genome sort of brings all of these issues to bear. So I don't have a particular question, but I would love to know more about this as a broader conversation, because I see so many problems with it, as well as, all the benefits it could bring.
Mark, go ahead, Alice.
This is Alice. Mark, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it might be nice to have a follow-up conversation outside of this, but the sad fact is that the data that's collected on human beings can be horribly abused, and especially genetic data, the ease of which the technology could be used to automate genocide, for example, it's not something to disregard. So because it's entirely possible that could happen. So the question is could we create a way where a person could choose their country of digital citizenship and have AI systems that are dependent upon data threads that come from a human domain model, with the human beings being able to sever their connection to these AI systems in the event the systems become malignant? So that's Alice, and I'm done speaking.
Yeah, Alice, that's an interesting idea. And I think there's been lots of discussion also around international frameworks for rights, for personal digital rights. And I think that it's interesting. On the one hand, just to sort of go back to Mark's point too, on the one hand, we've got this sort of, let's say, love affair in some ways as a society with the idea that we have, some check on government power. I mean, we all know that, sort of the statecraft actors, and you can think of the three-letter agencies in the United States, and then you can think of the allies like Palantir and others that are really sort of enabling this surveillance society, right, which becomes somewhat difficult for individuals. And I think that's going to require some sort of equivalent to the Geneva human rights. It's going to require some sort of international agreement that would curb some statecraft actors. On the other side, there's this sort of relationship of almost, competing rivals of our commercial interests. Many of us, and we're hearing and seeing folks like Apple take the stage on trying to be, at least perceived by individuals, to be the steward of privacy, right? And we've certainly read, at least in America, about Apple resisting certain kinds of encryption key giveaways to government agencies. Frankly, though, on the one hand, they're saying they don't need the keys because the government can already break in. So I'm not sure how effective the tech is on that system, but there's an interesting intersection here between, sort of division of powers, if you will, between commercial interests, government interests. There's commercial implications. There's all the nefarious sort of identification and surveillance implications. I mean, this hits on so many different threads, both fear, and frankly greed. I'm just sort of expositing at least what I think is ultimately under the hood of much of this. Anyway, I want to make sure we give Justin an opportunity. I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in on anything I just said or
comment really quick. Of course, I have to comment. I see this, the digital age is coming, and this is going to be the largest distribution of wealth ever. And what I worry about is those populations of patients like myself who are struggling to live, whose data does get taken, and you have cases like Henrietta Lacks that are coming out in the clinical trial space, where you have a lot of individuals who now refuse to give up their data, even though it could have a greater impact on their whole community because of that mistrust. So just another thing to throw in the thought bucket as we all, move forward. And
Thank you so much, Christine. Really great points. So I'd like to bring Justin up. Justin's on panel. Justin, the mic is yours.
Really great conversation. It touches on a lot of areas that I've worked directly in. One comment I wanted to go back to, and I think it was Elizabeth that was talking about, the kind of this concept that patients walk into an emergency room with a acute issue and essentially sign away rights to all their data. I push back on that a little bit. If something wasn't collected in a research context, we're very limited in what we can do with it and who we could potentially share it with. I know this conversation was primarily centering around genomic data, and then it gets even less. First of all, we only collect so much genomic data in a clinical context these days anyway, so obviously that's expanding. And unfortunately expanding way faster than our ability to manage that data in an EHR that was built to be a billing system and not a medical record can handle. But I mean, honestly, if like half my job is finding ways to get around the barriers to being able to collect and share genomic data, even when that's our intention, I can't take your genomic data without at least a 25-page consent form and a 15 to 30-minute conversation with the research coordinator. So I was a little bit hesitant to go along with this kind of notion that patients are signing that away unknowingly. I'm curious to hear any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I wasn't actually referring to genetic data, and I think your point is well taken, that there are different standards for different kinds of data. My reference is, and I'm happy to offline share with you materials, that there's a very large industry of data being sold by hospitals for other purposes, but I'm not referring to genetic data. Alice, her point about potentially utilizing genetic data as a mechanism, I'll let her speak to that. But just for clarity, I appreciate the question.
Alice? Sure. And before Alice goes, I just wanted to say, I think it's important to draw this distinction there. Because like you said, yes, hospitals absolutely do sell patient data, and we can talk about the ethics of that one way or another. But the point that Alice made earlier was that there is no way to truly de-identify genomic data. I mean, there are identifying signatures inherent to the data itself. I think that's why we treat genomic data so much differently than other health record data. So when we talk about selling health record data, once it leaves the hospital walls, I mean, again, anybody correct me if I'm wrong or feels differently, but yes, we can sell that data, but it has to be completely de-identified to again, it's up to each individual as to whether they agree with the standard to which it needs to be de-identified or not. But it's not like we're selling something that in theory should be tracked back to you as a patient.
So Justin, can I hop in really quick? This is Christine one more time. And you had said that when you go through a thing with genetic data, it's 75 pages of a contract and you have to sit down with someone. But that does not always happen in the patient community. And you working in this industry, I assume that they give you more respect than they do most patients in this space. And really, when you get into, I'm involved in a lot of genetic studies and clinical trials and all of that, and I will tell you that I don't get the explanation that I think I need, knowing what I know. And so that's really an issue. I think that, us in the industry, we know these ins and outs of things and patients don't. So a 75-page contract that you're going over with somebody who is really just searching for an answer, it's not the same kind of consent.
Alice, I'll give you the floor. Thank you, Christine.
Things like with the COVID data, they were analyzing genomes, and I saw a Stanford consent form, and it gave Stanford the rights to the data for something like 100 years, or it was just an absurdly long time frame. And these are absurd long contracts, and they're designed so whatever institution generates the data, that they can hold on to it. And what would be ideal, Justin, is to figure out a way to infrastructure so that the data for rare patients and the like readily available to the research community at scale, that can be consented across borders and allow for bidirectional communication with the patient if needed. So I agree with you that there's some barriers to that data being accessible.
Thank you. I want to give the mic to Chris and then Sujana. So Chris, the mic is yours.
Thank you. When I'm listening to this conversation about the genomic data and consent, I have to admit that nobody can read 75 pages consent and understand what they consent to, especially not in the situation when they're distressed because their health is in the jeopardy. So there's a question of how good are those consents and how informal are those consents in the people who are in need. And I think the biggest question is once you give the consent, giving somebody consent for 100 years to use their genomic data, it's pretty much giving the data forever. And there's no way I think the patients can get that data back. Now, my impression is that we can talk a lot about how we can consent, how we can do better. But the main problem is once the patients give the data, they cannot reverse that decision.
That's a very important point, Chris.
They know where the data are, they know the data are shared.
Exactly. That's a transparency issue. It's a really excellent, continuing problem. Sujana, I want to give the mic to you, and then Alice, I see you came off mute. Sujana?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I think Chris is still speaking.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Chris, you're pretty far away from the microphone.
But this is the only way that you can actually have a right to regain access, regain the right to your data. I do not believe that consenting or doing all the things that we do is really informative for the patient at the end of the day. And once the data are shared, the data out there. And you can trace back by using the genomic data quite precisely. In 1990s, we could find any medical record in Massachusetts using 5 identifiers. So I think with the genomic data, it's even easier. Even in my lab. So I think, that the problem, I think, is not how we get the consent, but the data should be right to erase those data. So the patients actually can gain the control. And there may be some arrangement how long that data should be in the repository before they forget, so the researcher can have some access. But at the end of the day, I, as a patient, have no access once I gave a consent. And once the consent is given, the horse are out of the barn. I don't know where they are. Over.
Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate that. I want to give the mic to Sujana and then to Alice, and then we'll just do a quick round and wrap up. So Sujana, the mic is yours.
Thank you. I just want to say I completely wholeheartedly agree with what Christine and Chris have had to say, which is that, yes, 75-page long consent documents are hard for anybody to get through, let alone patients who are at the point of care whose treatment or diagnosis is withheld without signing these, binary consent forms. What could help, however, in our experience, and obviously this has to be substantiated by a lot more research, is instilling what we call data intermediaries. Basically, third parties who represent the interests of patients in the process of data sharing, whether it's genomic data or not. And essentially, the role of the third party is to, at the heart of it, protect patient interests, upheld by a duty of care and loyalty to the people the intermediary represents, but also in so many ways dictating terms along which patient data is used. So, for example, a data intermediary in the US is Citizen. It comes to mind. And Citizen is this organization which collects data from several patients and patient advocacy groups to sort of liaise with pharmaceutical companies, with large hospitals and research institutions to ensure that their data is used for research purposes in a time-bound manner, and the consent collection mechanism is rather granular. Like for every project, the member is called and been explained what their data will be used for, how long, and through the process of research, patients retain the right to withdraw their data. So these are some ways of thinking about it, like instilling data intermediaries who essentially play the role of a representative or liaison, so that the patients themselves don't have to do the burden of going through complex consent forms, but nonetheless ensuring that your data is used for socially productive ends. That's pretty much what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to do a quick lightning round, maybe 30 seconds to sort of closing remarks from each of the members of the panel, and then we will wrap up our discussion. Really important discussion. We could talk for many, many hours, and we're really only touching pieces of what needs to be addressed, but that's why we're having these conversations on a regular basis. So Alice, the mic is yours for your closing remarks.
I just wanted to thank everyone for all the insightful comments that I heard today. Much to learn. And thank you very much to Consuli for putting the group together. I look forward to future conversations.
Thanks so much.
Alice, and done speaking.
Thanks so much, Alice. I'd love to turn the floor now to David. The mic is yours.
Excellent discussion, and just big thanks to everyone who's participating in moving this important topic forward. This is David. I'm done speaking.
Thanks so much, David. Yabi, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much for your interest in having me. I've learned lots of things. I was very impressed with geolocation and DNA and some other ideas. Looking forward for more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Javi. Appreciate that. Chris, the mic is yours.
Oh, thank you. I think this is a great conversation. I think we built very sound foundation for the patient to trust us, and I hope we'll continue. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Mark?
Yeah, just echoing everybody, I want to say thank you so much for bringing me into the conversation. I hope it's the first of many, because I agree we could talk for hours and hours on end and still only scratch the surface in this. But I really appreciate all of the provocations and the ideas from everybody, and looking forward to the next one.
Perfect. Christine, the mic is yours.
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me on. But second, I think we need to really look at this more from a global perspective, and more with that bottoms-up approach, where we really need to educate our populations and not just patients. Because I believe that we all will be genetically sequenced at some point. And so really just, pushing that idea and really exploring the topic as we move forward. So thank you, as always, for having me.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the perspective you bring. And Saujana, the mic is yours.
It's been wonderful listening to what everybody has to say, particularly, some of the conversations from Christine and so on, bringing in the essential patient perspective. Hope to see more of this happen and keep in touch with Consuli. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, so just want to deep thanks to our panel, deep thanks to our team of Arca, Julie, and Julia, who helped make this all possible. And I'm going to turn it over to Julie for some closing remarks. Thanks a lot.
Julie speaking. Thank you so much for another fabulous conversation. I'm very much looking forward to the next one. In closing, again, Julie Szmyd here, project manager at Consuli and host for this room and club. We are Consuli Conversations. Please tap the little greenhouse at the top, give us a follow. And just as we wrap in